Hello, my name is Caitlin, and I am a museum educator at the National Museum of the United States Army. Today, we are going to learn more about a theme that runs throughout the history of the Army: innovation and technology. Since its founding, the Army has developed new technology, training, and strategies to overcome challenges and accomplish the mission. Today, we are going to look at this theme of innovation and technology during World War II. Specifically, we are going to learn how the U.S. Army developed and improved upon airborne technology. Today's talk will focus on World War II paratroopers. Before we get started, does anyone have an idea what the term paratrooper means? Does anyone know what I mean by the term airborne operations? To make sure that we are on the same page, when I use the term paratrooper, I am talking about a soldier who is trained to parachute or jump into an operation, usually from an airplane. An airborne operation is a military mission that relies on paratroopers to complete the mission. Before we focus on World War II, let's take a step back to get an idea of what led to the development of airborne troops and the use of paratroopers. The idea sprang from World War I, when militaries around the world recognized the horrors of a stalemated modern war. Trench warfare contributed to these horrors. World War I was characterized by battles fought in trenches with an open no man's land between them to prevent the enemy from gaining ground. Trenches led to stalemates and high casualties. Take a look at the image on the screen of a World War I battlefield. If you look closely, you can see the trenches. If you look really closely, you can actually see soldiers moving in the trenches. What stands out to you about the terrain? This landscape is almost unrecognizable. There are craters and lines everywhere, and the land is completely destroyed, with no trees or other vegetation. Not only did trench warfare destroy the environment, it also had a devastating human toll. The Battle of the Somme lasted 140 days in 1916 and amounted to 600,000 Allied casualties. Of that number, 146,431 were killed. All of this devastation for the Allies to gain 6 miles of territory. Based on the experiences of World War I, the Army learned that this type of fighting was not sustainable. The costs were too great. It destroyed the landscape, including civilian towns and villages, and had a devastating impact on soldiers. Military leaders needed a solution for future conflicts. So what does the Army come up with? Vertical envelopment. Has anyone ever heard of this term before? What do you think it means? Vertical envelopment, in its simplest form, means surrounding the enemy from above. Following World War I, Army planners began to think about how to integrate airplanes into war plans. They theorized that aircraft could be used to surround the enemy from above and drop soldiers into a conflict using parachutes. Using this method, planners believed that they could get behind enemy lines, cut off lines of communication, and capture key locations, thereby eliminating the need for trenches and solving what came to be known as the problem of blood, mud, and futility. While the U.S. Army experimented with this idea, Germany was the first army to demonstrate the real-world implications of vertical envelopment, proving that this concept was viable. Fort Aben-Amel was considered the most impenetrable fortress in Europe. Located along the Belgian border with Germany, it was built to withstand any attack imaginable. It was surrounded by turrets, guns, and water on 2 sides. It also had ventilation and filtration systems to protect against poison gas. However, while the fort was surrounded by fortifications, the upper surfaces lacked any protection. No one had ever conceived of an enemy attack from above. That changed on May 10, 1940, when 78 German paratroopers landed on the fort, which was guarded by 650 Belgian soldiers. Despite their numbers disadvantage, the German paratroopers captured the fort. Its loss delivered a blow to the Belgian army and opened Europe up to invasion by the German army. The assault was also a wake-up call to the U.S. Army. After seeing the effectiveness of airborne operations, the Army ramped up its training and development of airborne technology. Dropping soldiers from airplanes to fight behind enemy lines required the Army to develop new technology, new tactics, and essentially a new type of soldier. First, the Army needed to recruit and train the men who would fill this role. What types of skills and characteristics do you think paratroopers needed? Paratroopers needed to have strength. Paratroopers were volunteers who jumped from airplanes into an unknown area. This meant that soldiers needed to carry a lot of equipment. So soldiers needed to be strong in order to physically make the jump, but also to carry heavier loads. Paratroopers also needed flexibility and a sense of independence. Paratroopers needed to operate independently, often with little direction. This was very different than how soldiers typically trained up to this point. Paratroopers were preparing to drop behind enemy lines, where they would likely be separated from their battalions or higher headquarters. So these soldiers needed to work together independently with little to no direction. Paratroopers also needed mental strength. Soldiers who first signed up for this role had no idea what they were volunteering for. They would be the first of their kind. Most importantly, though, they needed to endure the physical training required to become a paratrooper. All volunteers had to survive airborne school. Airborne school was created by the Army to train this new type of soldier. The video that you see on your screen is from the National Archives and shows soldiers training at airborne school.
Here's how a fighting paratrooper is made. Our man begins by learning to jump, to tumble, to fall. Here's a machine that builds bodies. The training gets tougher. Up in a harness for a quick slide to the ground to give him the feeling of movement in the air. A wind machine is used to fill the practice chute so he can learn to handle his parachute on the ground. Next, he drops from a 200-foot tower in a parachute chair. He gets an idea of height and view. And the sensation of coming down quickly. Now he is closer to the real thing. He is hoisted by cable, and he learns how it feels when a parachute opens.
Airborne school was divided into 4 one-week stages. The first week, A stage, was a physical gauntlet of almost constant running, calisthenics, and exercise designed to wash out those without the mental toughness to endure while teaching classroom fundamentals. B stage continued the exercise while drilling landing fundamentals and basic hand-to-hand combat. While A and B stages tested physical and mental endurance, C stage challenged courage. What would later be known as Tower Week simulated the exiting and in-descent portions of a parachute jump, and both were and still are generally considered more mentally challenging than actually jumping. Finally, during D stage, aspiring paratroopers made their 5 qualifying jumps and shipped to their units. Now, graduation from airborne school didn't mean the end of training. It was just the start of a lifetime of training. Once a paratrooper arrived to their regiment, the training continued. 5-mile runs, marches in full field gear, hand-to-hand combat training, and weapons training were routine. In all, physical fitness, tactical capability, and toughness were prized above all else. Anyone who could not rapidly be brought up to the physical, tactical, or mental standards expected were quickly moved out. This training, along with the newness of the role, created a mystique around paratroopers. Paratroopers considered themselves to be an elite volunteer force. In addition to creating new training, the Army developed new equipment for paratroopers. What types of equipment do you think a paratrooper would need? In general, soldiers carried with them weapons, food, shelter, and clothing. Paratroopers were no different. However, because of their job, paratroopers needed to carry a lot of equipment with them. While the average infantry soldier carried 57 pounds of equipment, a paratrooper carried between 70 and 90 pounds of equipment before he put on his parachute. With the parachute weight, most paratroopers exited the airplane door carrying an additional 90 to 120 pounds. Let's look at some of the equipment a paratrooper would carry with them heading into an operation. On your screen is some of the equipment that paratroopers carried with them. First, let's talk about paratroopers' weapons. All paratroopers had a weapon with them. It was usually a M1 Garand, but some also may have carried a Thompson machine gun or the M1 carbine. In addition to their weapon, all paratroopers carried with them extra ammunition and weapons like explosives and bombs. They might also carry things like mortars or machine gun ammunition. This was to support their units since they were jumping into territory without larger artillery like an infantry soldier, and because they would be without resupply. Next up is food. All paratroopers carried 3 days worth of rations plus emergency rations. This indicates that paratroopers needed to be prepared to fend for themselves for at least 3 days while behind enemy lines without support. Paratroopers also had a compass. Not all soldiers carried compasses. They were usually reserved for officers or technical specialists. So why would a compass be important for paratroopers? Paratroopers needed to orient themselves after landing. Their drop location wasn't guaranteed, so a compass, along with a map, was incredibly important. Finally, all paratroopers needed their parachute and a lowering rope for climbing down in case of a tree landing, and an M2 knife to cut themselves down if needed. We've talked about weapons and equipment, but what other things do soldiers, particularly paratroopers, need for survival? Clothing. All soldiers wear a uniform, and paratroopers were no different. However, the Army modified these soldiers' uniform to make it unique to the role they perform. Let's start with the jumpsuit. Here we have the jacket part of the jump uniform. You'll notice that it is a 4-pocket blouse, and that these are larger pockets meant to store equipment like ammunition and grenades, and it was treated to resist mustard gas. We also have the trousers or pants part of the jump uniform. So again, we have a larger pocket here, and then also a tie strap attached to the inseam to keep the pocket close to the leg. Next, we have the jump boot. Now, jump boots were something that soldiers took great pride in. They did not have the standard 2 buckles that you would see in normal boots because this could snag when paratroopers were jumping. Instead, here we have the higher lacing meant to stabilize the ankle upon landing. And then we have the paratrooper's helmet, which was much like a standard M1 helmet. It does have netting to add leaves and other camouflage, and then some extra straps to secure it. So how did paratroopers carry all of this equipment? Well, here we have some of the paratroopers' load-bearing equipment. And a part of this equipment is a mooseset bag or a field bag. Now, this was usually for officers, but paratroopers used this bag as well. For paratroopers, they were used to carry additional equipment since haversacks were too bulky. We also have a first aid kit as a part of our load-bearing equipment. Now, infantry soldiers carried a smaller first aid kit which contained a field bandage. Paratroopers also carried an additional first aid kit that contained a compression bandage, cloth tourniquet, and disposable morphine syringe, and again we can see that here. So when we think about why would paratroopers need an expanded first aid kit, keep in mind that they didn't have ready access to a field hospital. And finally, some paratroopers carried a communication device like this known as a cricket. This allowed paratroopers to communicate under total darkness when they landed scattered. One click meant who's there. 2 clicks meant front. So in just 3 short years, the Army had recruited, trained, and equipped soldiers to test out the theory of vertical envelopment. By 1943, they were ready for their first big test. That test would come at Sicily, the first large-scale airborne assault in Army history. Sicily is a large Italian island located in the Mediterranean Sea. The Allies hoped that invading the island would open the Mediterranean for shipping and put pressure on the Italians to exit the war. The plan was for an amphibious or water landing on the beaches of Sicily. However, military planners were concerned that German troops would reach the beaches before the landing forces exited the beaches. If that happened, the Allies would be overwhelmed and defeated. The solution? Drop paratroopers into Sicily the evening before the invasion. Their goal was to provide cover to troops arriving on shore and prevent the Germans from reaching the beach. Sounds simple, but the plan quickly went amiss. The paratroopers took off from Africa as planned, but once in the air, the plan deteriorated. High tailwinds and poor visibility caused pilots to veer out of formation and become lost. As a result, the pilots dropped paratroopers over a 65-mile area along the southern coast. Only 12% landed as planned. That first night, many doubted that they were even in Sicily. Despite these problems, the paratroopers were successful. They were able to regroup and hold their ground against German troops. While critics of the operation called it a snafu, or situation normal all fouled up, the operation proved the capability and possibilities of airborne troops. It demonstrated that small groups of paratroopers could accomplish their mission by flexibly and independently responding to their commander's intent. Even their scattered landing worked to their advantage. One confused Italian commander believed that perhaps 50,000 paratroopers had landed on the island and was at a loss of how to respond. However, there clearly were problems. Paratroopers needed to find a way to prevent inaccurate drops. The paratroopers had just a few months to take the lessons learned and apply them to their next operation. That moment came a few months later in September 1943 during the invasion of the Italian mainland. The invasion began on September 9th with an amphibious landing at Salerno that quickly fell apart. Allied troops landing on the beaches were greeted by loudspeakers proclaiming in English, "Come on in and give up, we have you covered." Things quickly went from bad to worse. The German army pushed Allied troops back to the beaches and defeat seemed imminent. What do you think Allied commanders decided to do? Risking defeat, General Clark, commander of the 5th Army, turned to the paratroopers. After Sicily, the airborne troops developed new tactics and technology to improve their effectiveness. The first development was the Pathfinder concept. With this concept, a group of small, specially trained paratroopers would jump in before the main body and covertly mark drop zones. The Pathfinders operated a Eureka and Rebecca system. The Pathfinder carried with them a Eureka transponder. The transponder sent out a signal to the Rebecca airborne transceiver and antenna. This was located on the airplane that would be carrying the main invasion force. Rebecca calculated the range to the Eureka based on timing signals. This would ensure that the aircraft carrying paratroopers made its targeted drop zone. In Salerno, within 2 hours of receiving the request for help, the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment had assembled and were planning the mission. Within 8 hours, they were airborne. This time, the jump at Salerno was far more accurate. The majority were able to rapidly assemble and move directly to the front lines to dig in defensive positions. Supporting the 5th Army, the paratroopers were able to take the high ground and contribute to what ultimately would be an Allied victory. The airborne operation at Salerno was not only a success, but it refined techniques and equipment that would be used at Normandy, which would be the big test for the Army's paratroopers. Salerno proved that airborne troops could rapidly assemble. In this case, they deployed within 8 hours of notification. The development of the Eureka and Rebecca technology also improved drops, making the paratroopers more effective. By 1944, the Western Allies were ready to launch an assault into Nazi Germany's Fortress Europe. However, unlike previous amphibious operations, the Allies faced a unique challenge: the Atlantic Wall, which closed off the coast from amphibious invasion forces. In fact, the Allies had tried to land in France in August 1942 at Dieppe. However, it proved to be disastrous. The raid caused Germany to shift additional divisions to Europe and created an even more impregnable defense around the coast. If you take a look at your screen, you can see just what type of defenses surrounded the coast. Allied planners turned to paratroopers to combat the Atlantic Wall. Planners hoped that paratroopers inserted behind enemy lines could seize critical road junctions and limit the ability of German forces to reinforce and resupply the Atlantic Wall, giving the amphibious landing forces the best opportunity to make their way inland. On your screen is an iconic image taken on D-Day from the landing craft headed to the beaches. And if you look through the mist, you can see the Atlantic Wall rising from the beaches. This gives you a visual representation of what they were competing against. The video on your screen gives you a glimpse into what the paratroopers were doing at Normandy. This video from the National Archives shows the second wave of paratroopers jumping into Normandy. In the late hours of June 5th, members of both the 101st Airborne Division and the 82nd jumped into Normandy. Roughly 6,500 paratroopers jumped from nearly 370 aircraft into an intended objective area of roughly 10 square miles. The paratroopers used their new tactics, including pathfinders, to help limit drop issues. Although some battalions still found themselves scattered and intermingled, they were able to rapidly assemble into small groups, often squads and ad hoc platoons, across unit boundaries to seize known objectives. These small groups were able to seize bridges and clear towns to prepare for the amphibious assault, with glider regiments landing to provide additional infantry and heavy equipment to repel German tank forces. In the end, the after-action report from the 82nd summarizes the successes on D-Day and shows how quickly the Army developed and implemented this new type of soldier. The report reads, 33 days of action without relief, without replacements. Every mission accomplished. No ground gain was ever relinquished. I'd like to thank you for joining our talk on the U.S. Army paratroopers in World War II. I hope you were able to see how the Army developed new technology, training, and strategies to overcome challenges and accomplish the mission, and how the U.S. Army developed and improved upon airborne technology during World War II. For more information, please visit our website.